Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to my house. It is Wednesday, April 1st, and today we're going to talk about the Fifth and Sixth Amendments to the United States Constitution. Before we get into that, though, I want to touch very briefly on a very important question that one of your classmates, Miss Gibbs, asked in comments to the previous YouTube lecture video, and that was about underrepresentation of people of color in government when it comes to making laws, passing laws, and interpreting laws. She mentioned that people of color are not represented in the groups that are not adequately represented in the groups that make those kind of decisions. And it's such a difficult topic because for so much of this country's history up to the present, people of color, and I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll keep this specific to people of African descent, are so underrepresented in policymaking, in elected office. Most, not all, but most members of Congress, and certainly most of our presidents, they look like me, except without the beard, maybe, at least in recent years, because they're white men of European descent for the most part. And the problem with that is it means that people are passing laws that impact all groups, all ethnicities, people of all different national origins and religions, of ages and sexual orientations and gender identifications. But all those groups don't have equal say, proportionate say in lawmaking. Now, we could discuss whether or not proportionate government, representative government is important. I tend to think it is for some obvious reasons. If laws are going to, sorry, I got a glare here, a bunch of light coming in. If laws are going to affect a certain population, that population should be able to weigh in on it. In theory, the American government is made up solely of folks who represent the people. And if you're going to represent the people, you should have the perspective of the people. Now, can a white man understand and represent the views of someone who's not a white man? In theory, sure, as long as that's an open-minded, intelligent person who listens to everyone. Myself, my state representative right now is a black woman, and I think she does a pretty good job representing my interests, but that's just my opinion, and I'm just one person. When it comes to underrepresentation in government, it's worth noting that I mentioned my state representative is a black woman. However, and it's Representative Attica Scott. I live in her state legislative district. Until she was elected, I believe it was 2016, until she was elected to that office, there are 138 legislators in Kentucky, and until Attica Scott was elected to that office, there had not been a woman of color in the state legislature in Frankfort in about 16 or 17 years. That's a long time to go with no women of color in state legislature, considering how many women of color live in Kentucky. It's really kind of an embarrassing statistic to think about how many decisions are being made by people who are not decisions that impact certain ethnic groups, but being made by people who are not members of those ethnic groups. And that's what underrepresentation is all about. Underrepresentation meaning there are not an adequate number of people to represent a certain population. And y'all, I'm sorry if you can't tell, I'm really distracted by this lighting situation I'm having here. I'm going to keep messing with the light in this room a little bit, see if I can get it. It's good for now. But anyway, for a lot of U.S. history, only white men could vote, and then only men could vote. And even then, when it was theoretically legal for black men to vote, it took a long time before there was anything resembling open access to the polling places for black men, and that's still very arguable whether or not that exists today. People of African descent make up roughly 13% of the United States total population today, and Congress is about 9% people of African descent. So a little under 10% of, a little under 1/10 of Congress is made up of people of African descent. So people of color do make laws in America, but the only way that 1/10 of Congress can pass laws is to get a whole bunch of white people who are in Congress to vote with them. Is that fair? Probably not. But that's one of those topics where you could do a whole semester on underrepresentation in government. I just want to touch on it very briefly. I do think, though, the notion that people of color don't make laws was true at one time in our history for sure. Even you could argue recent times, but a lot of that changed in the last few elections. I'm not saying that people of color are well represented in government. I'm not saying that at all. We've got a long way to go, and a lot of progress needs to be made in this country on that topic. However, with Barack Obama being elected president in 2008 and serving as president for 8 years, every single executive order he issued was a law that was made by a black man. We could discuss his ethnic background, but the fact is he's clearly not a white man of European descent, and that was a person of color making law, and that's one of many, 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 many reasons why the 2008 presidential election was so important, so historically significant. But we have a lot of progress to be made, and if we have time in these videos, I'll touch on this some more. If y'all want me to elaborate a little bit and break down these numbers a little bit more, I'd be happy to. And whether or not the judicial system treats people of color equally is a whole other topic that I touched on briefly last week, and we can get into more. If y'all want more detail on that, let me know. We can get into it in one of these videos. But for now, that's a quick oversimplification of that topic, and I'm grateful to Ms. Gibbs for asking that question. Moving on to today's lecture, we're going to talk about there goes my light again. That's not a good look. We're going to talk about the Fifth and Sixth Amendments to the United States Constitution. And what are those amendments? Well, the Fifth Amendment deals with several things, but you may have heard it in the pop culture setting, in TVs and movie and literature, referencing the right not to self-incriminate. There's also a due process clause in the 15th Amendment that's a pretty big deal. And the Sixth Amendment has to do with getting a fair trial by jury in criminal offenses. So, Fifth Amendment, we're going to skip over the first half or so of that amendment, and I want to hit on two pieces of this that are very important. Number one is the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment. A person shall not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That is kind of what it sounds like. Of course, the courts and our judicial system have made this pretty complicated over time, but it really doesn't mean what it sounds like. It means that if the government is going to deprive you of your life, of your liberty, that's your freedom to do whatever you choose, or your property, there must be a due process. So when an individual is arrested and charged with a crime, the punishment for that crime is incarceration, prison time. There must be a process in place. There must be some sort of mechanism, some structure to put that person through a trial and determine their guilt or innocence. Of course, I'm oversimplifying this. Of course, there are many, many pieces to this, both historically and today, that make this a difficult little piece of this Fifth Amendment, make it a difficult piece of the Constitution. But what you really need to know is that the Constitution says you shall not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without a legal process to determine whether or not that's fair. What does fair mean? Well, it means justice. What does justice mean? It should mean that everyone is treated equally under the law, and that if the law is going to punish us in some way, it should be because we have committed a crime that justifies that punishment. I'm telling you what it should mean. I'm not telling you how it plays out in reality. I can say that we've come a long way in this country in this regard, but I cannot say that every single time a person is deprived of life, liberty, or property, that it is with due process. I just want you to know what the Constitution says on this topic and to understand the way it's supposed to work. With that, there's another little piece of this that's important, and it says that no one shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. That also means what it sounds like, and this is the context of the Fifth Amendment that you may have heard in pop culture references and in entertainment references. It means that if I am charged with a crime and I'm on trial for that crime, with my lighting again, it means that the government cannot say, all right, Mr. Gray, you will tell us what you were doing the night of March 31st. If the answer to that question is that I was committing a crime on March 31st, I can plead the Fifth Amendment. I can avail myself of the right against self-incrimination. That's all that means. Now, on a related topic, let's talk about the Sixth Amendment. Again, we're not going to do all the amendments because there's not time. Also because, to be frank, some are more important than others. The Fifth and Sixth are two very important amendments. The Sixth Amendment says that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. To be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Once again, this is a historically complex piece of the Constitution, but the way it's written is fairly straightforward. If a person is accused of a crime, that person has the right to not only a trial, but a speedy and public trial. What does speedy mean? What does public mean? Well, the courts have interpreted that over time to mean a number of different things, but most importantly, that the proceedings of a trial cannot be done in secret in a way that disadvantages the defendant, that disadvantages the accused. A speedy trial, because people are so often, for serious crimes, held in jail while they're waiting trial, it's not cool for the government to delay, just so the government can build their case. It should have a reasonable amount of time for the prosecution to build its case, and then they should go to trial. Unnecessary delays are a problem. They are unconstitutional, and it's up to the defendant's attorney to bring that up in court and to make that argument to a judge. It's also important that, to the extent practical, the trial is held in the area in which the crime occurred. So, for obvious reason, in most cases, like if I rob somebody tomorrow, if I rob somebody in Louisville tomorrow, I live in Louisville, the crime happened in Louisville, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put me on trial in Florida. I mean, for a number of reasons. It's not fair to me, and it's actually not fair to the prosecution either. So, to the extent possible, it should happen in the area where the crime occurred. What are some exceptions to that? One major exception to where a trial occurs has to do with another piece of this sentence about the trial being conducted by an impartial jury. An impartial jury. That's important when the crime or the defendant is notorious. The best example of this in my lifetime is the original O.J. Simpson trial, the one where he was accused and acquitted, found not guilty of murdering his ex-wife and Ron Goldman. The issue with that trial was that it'd be impossible to find 12 jurors, 12 registered voters in the Los Angeles area who had never heard of O.J. Simpson and had never heard of the crime. that he allegedly committed. The bigger problem with OJ's trial was that it's impossible to find 12 jurors anywhere in the United States that hadn't heard of the trial and of the case. A better example would be when there is a case that happens in a city, let's say a small town, like my hometown of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. If there were a murder in that town and it was very well known, it was all over the local news and over regional news networks, maybe nobody in Louisville had ever heard of it though. Well, maybe you want to move that trial to Louisville to get an impartial jury. So the point of this amendment is to make sure that trials that determine someone's guilt or innocence are as impartial and as fair to the defendant as possible. Once again, historically, this hasn't always broken down like that, but that's the way it's supposed to work. And if anytime there is a criminal proceeding against a defendant that is not impartial, that is partial, that is biased, that has any sort of inherent bias or impartiality to it, the defendant's attorney should make that motion and let the judge know that what's happening is in violation of the Sixth Amendment. People have a right to call witnesses in their favor, and they have the right to counsel. They have a right to have the assistance of counsel for their defense. That's important. That's important because the legal system is so damn complicated that the average person, even if they're a very intelligent person, without proper legal training and experience, has really no business representing his or herself in a criminal trial, or any trial, but certainly when they're accused of a serious crime. So the Sixth Amendment says you have the right to counsel. Now, it's worth noting that it just says the assistance of counsel for his defense. That's all it says. Of course, it's determined over the years that it means competent counsel, but qualified counsel just means someone who's licensed to practice law in the state where the trial is going down. That's all it means. But what right to counsel means is also debatable. It's certainly true that people with unlimited financial resources can often obtain very effective counsel when they're accused of a crime, and that low-income individuals sometimes do not have that ability. Although, hey, some public defenders are excellent. Some public defenders are the best in their county at defending people accused of crimes. But it depends. It depends on the case. It depends on the attorney. So with that, those are some brief summaries of the Fifth and Sixth Amendment. If you have additional questions or thoughts, and these are pretty controversial topics, so if you have questions or thoughts, post in the comments below, and do not forget to post in the comments that you have seen the video. You can also text me, you can email me, but it's a whole lot simpler for me to get that little notification on my phone that someone posted a comment on the video. Check you off, and you get participation credit for this class. So I hope everybody is staying well. I hope everybody is staying safe. I hope you and your families have enough toilet paper, paper towels, food, and water. I hope you're all getting through this okay. But like I said, don't forget to post in the comments below. Don't forget to send me your quizzes that I went over in the last lecture and that I sent out an email earlier this week. And everybody stay safe. Have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you all on Monday.